Picture two grandmothers standing on the same porch. One of them has just been robbed of every dollar in her savings account. And in this disturbing case, the other grandmother is the robber. They are roughly the same age, and they could easily belong to the same bridge club. Within about 45 seconds, one of them is going to drive away with the cash, board a plane to Albania, and vanish. Her name was Lyda Harris. She was 73 years old, and she became a working member of one of the most disturbing fraud rings the FBI has ever broken open. Before federal agents finally tracked her down, Lyda Harris had joined an elaborate criminal organization that siphoned more than $2 million out of elderly Americans across the United States. The person who arrived at the front door, accepted the envelope of cash, and looked the victim directly in the eye was herself, a grandmother. That is how deep the grandparent scam has reached into the demographic it preys on, and it reveals something important about how this fraud actually operates, who genuinely runs it, and why almost nothing about it resembles what you probably picture. On paper, Lyda Harris was nobody you would ever notice. She was a woman in her 70s living in a quiet suburb southwest of Phoenix, the kind of neighborhood where lawns get watered in the early morning and grandchildren visit on holidays. There was nothing in that profile that anyone, anywhere would ever flag as suspicious. And according to the Justice Department, that quiet invisibility was exactly the point. Between roughly December of 2019 and October of 2020, Harris belonged to a criminal organization that ran one of the largest grandparent scam operations. The ring siphoned more than $2 million from over 70 elderly victims across the country. And in San Diego County alone, at least 10 victims lost more than $300,000. The scheme operated the way most of these schemes operate. A caller would phone an elderly American, pretend to be a grandchild, and claim to be in some kind of urgent legal trouble. There had been an accident, there was a bail bond, or there were medical bills. The story shifted from call to call, but the pressure never wavered. Send money immediately. Where Harris entered the operation was on the back end. Once a victim had been worn down, the cash had to move. Sometimes it was wired, sometimes it was mailed, and sometimes a courier arrived. Federal prosecutors say Harris received victim proceeds and channeled them to a co-conspirator, who then converted the cash into cryptocurrency to launder it and shuttle it offshore. In the precise language of the indictment, she was a member of the enterprise, a participant in a months-long racketeering conspiracy. To understand why a scheme like this works, you have to understand the phone call. The moment of the scam is not really when the cash leaves the house. The moment of the scam is the first 10 seconds of the call. In a typical grandparent scam, the phone rings during the day, usually a weekday, and the voice on the other end says something deliberately blurry. "Hi, Grandma, it is me. My voice sounds weird because I have been crying." That single sentence is engineered to do two things at once. It plants the suggestion of a grandchild, and it provides a built-in excuse for why the voice does not quite match. From there, the victim almost always supplies the grandchild's name on their own. They say something like, "Michael, is that you?" And the caller simply agrees. Once a name has been confirmed, the script accelerates. The supposed grandchild explains the accident. Then a second voice comes on the line, usually a man identifying as a lawyer or bondsman. That second voice exists to take control and introduce two new pressures: money immediately and secrecy. Both of those instructions are deeply unnatural, and that is exactly why they work. Real lawyers do not ask grandparents to wire untraceable cash. Real police do not coach secrecy. But in the moment, the victim is not running a logic check. They are reaching for their checkbook. Consider how this plays out. A woman in her late 70s lives alone. The phone rings at 10 a.m. She picks up, and a young man's voice, sounding rattled, says he is in trouble. Within the first sentence, she has already supplied her grandson's name. He confirms it. He tells her he was in an accident and is sitting in a holding cell. He begs her not to tell his mother. The lawyer does call. He is calm, professional, and extremely specific about the $9,500. He says a bonded courier will arrive at her home within 90 minutes to collect the cash. He tells her that if word of the arrest reaches his employer, he will lose his job. He stays on the line. She drives to her credit union. The teller asks gentle questions about why she needs the cash. She gives the answer the lawyer coached: "I am buying a used car from a private seller." The teller has no legal basis to refuse. She walks out with $9,500 in an envelope. The courier arrives at 12:45. She is polite, possibly someone's grandmother herself. She accepts the envelope, thanks the victim, and drives away. The money is wired offshore immediately. By the time the real grandson calls that evening from Denver, completely unharmed, the money is gone. That is the shape of the crime, a carefully choreographed window by professionals who have rehearsed every line. By the time the federal grand jury in San Diego handed down the indictment, Harris had disappeared. 7 other defendants were named alongside her, with ages ranging from 23 to 45. The charge was conspiracy under the RICO Act, a law normally reserved for the mafia. Harris had fled to Albania. In August of 2021, she was picked up there on a provisional arrest warrant. Federal officers escorted her back to the United States in custody in November of 2021. In July of 2022, she stood in front of a federal judge in San Diego and pleaded guilty. She was sentenced to 12 months in prison and ordered to pay $1.2 million in restitution. That last number is worth sitting with for a moment. $1.2 million from a woman in her 70s. She was handed a court order she will almost certainly never finish paying. The ring unraveled because investigators began connecting victim reports across multiple jurisdictions. Investigators followed the cash. They traced money flowing into cryptocurrency wallets that converged on a handful of accounts. That convergence allowed prosecutors to argue these were members of a single enterprise. The case has since become a template for using the RICO framework in elder fraud investigations. Why does a grandmother end up running the grandparent scam? Because she does not look like a criminal. These scams are run by networks. There is the caller, the closer, the courier, and the launderer. A 73-year-old woman is invisible to suspicion, and that invisibility is precisely the asset. The FBI cautions that scammers deliberately recruit older Americans into roles like this. Sometimes they are victims first, converted into unwitting money mules through romance scams or fake jobs. The human you interact with can resemble the person sitting across from you at your own kitchen table. If criminals were designing the ideal victim, they would design something close to the average elderly American. That is not an accident. The first factor is capital. Most seniors have spent 40 or 50 years accumulating real savings. Their home is paid off. They have retirement accounts and life insurance policies to borrow against. A successful scam against a 75-year-old can net $100,000. The economics are clear. The second factor is isolation. Older Americans are statistically more likely to live alone. Spouses pass away. When there is no one else in the room, the victim has only their own panicked judgment to rely on. The third factor is the family dynamic. The relationship with grandchildren carries a unique protective instinct. The scam slips under the impulse to verify by making secrecy part of the cover story. The fourth factor is silence. Older Americans feel shame and worry that reporting will lead to a loss of independence. Reported losses likely represent only a small fraction of what is actually happening. Many never tell their children. In 2024 alone, Americans over 60 reported nearly $4.9 billion in fraud losses. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry, expanding rapidly with a labor force and a supply chain. The person who arrives to collect the money will almost never look like a threat. They are selected for that reason. You cannot identify a scam by the person on your doorstep, only by what is asked of you on the phone. A frantic call, an instruction for secrecy, and a demand for cash or wire. Those are the flags. Once the cash leaves your hands, it is wired to the Dominican Republic, West Africa, or Eastern Europe. The money is gone. The person who took it is just a small piece of a very large machine. They are rarely the ones held responsible. Meanwhile, the phones keep ringing. Grandparents answer and hear a voice that sounds exactly like someone they love. The best thing you can do is have one short, calm conversation with them today. Tell them to hang up and call you. Tell them they are allowed to take their time. The only person who benefits from urgency is the scammer.